Have you been writing for years and never published? Or maybe you suffer from writer's block and haven't been able to finish your manuscript. Well, today we want to help you write your story. The Aware Show starts right now.
This original WSRE presentation is made possible by viewers like you. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Dee Dee Sharp, and welcome to this edition of The Aware Show. We're glad to have you right where you are. And if you were able to join us for the first part of our show, then you got a chance to take a sneak peek into the first 3 chapters of my soon-to-be-released first new book called Aware, Finding Divine Purpose in Dysfunction. It's a memoir of my struggles on and off the air as a news anchor and as host of this very show, The Aware Show. Well, today we want to examine some of the challenges of writing, editing, and even publishing. And if you've ever wanted to become an author of your own book, well, we've got what you need to know right here on The Aware Show. And to do it, joining us here in the studio are my guests. We have Regina Sakalarios-Rogers, Ph.D., a writer and University of West Florida Creative Writing Instructor. Next, we have this guy, C. Scott Satterwhite, writer and UWF Composition and Rhetoric Instructor. We also have LaVender Williams, author and publisher, as well as Kimberly Cox, who's an author and promoter. And joining us again is our very own consultant, Mamie Hixon, of Readers and Writers, Inc. book club member. She's also at UWF with the Writing Lab as the director and the UWF Assistant Professor of English. Thank you all for being here, and I think just by your very titles, people can see why you're on the set, talking not only about some of the excerpts from my first book, but also helping other people write their own book. So I really appreciate you all for being here. And Mamie, you were too kind in the first part of the program with my book. And, you know, I guess it's like I said earlier, when you're having your own baby, you don't want somebody to tell you it's ugly. You want it's your creative work. You want them to tell you the good things about it. But the thing that I love about you all is you can say what you say, even though it might, you know what I mean? It might, it's constructive criticism. I'll say that. And I've appreciated, and I've taken a lot of notes from the green room and here on the air as we tape the program. I thank you all for being here once again. I'm going to get started once again, Mamie. You were able to help us consult and put this thing together so that we could present to our viewers a great opportunity for them to be able to write their own story as well as examine mine. Tell us a little bit about what we have here.
Okay. It was my delight, my honor to have been asked by you. At least you said, I have written a book, because I received a phone call on the grammar hotline at UWF, and the caller said, I have wrote a book. Uh-oh. I thought, we're in trouble. That's not going to work.
I did not make that call. She's talking about somebody else.
It was not you.
No.
So when you asked, I said, okay, let's think of some people who write and who know about publishing. I immediately thought of LaVender as a writer and publisher herself. In fact, Readers and Writers, Inc. invited LaVender to one of our book club meetings several years ago. We read your book.
We Snap in Silence.
Yes, We Snap in Silence. And do you know I use that phrase a lot?
Do you?
Snapping in silence.
That's good.
And then Regina and Scott are my colleagues at UWF, and they teach writing and creative writing. So I knew we were good to go with them. I'm just so delighted that both of you are available tonight. And then Kimberly is a growing, budding writer. She's also a promoter. She's a little bit of everything, but she has written about her own struggles. Okay. And I thought she would be perfect for this panel. So thank you all again for joining us.
Absolutely. So we'll dive right in. What do we think about the manuscript? Aware, showing divine purpose in dysfunction.
Well,
I love that you had an opportunity to tell me off air that this is sort of like what you do in a lot of ways.
it's not only what I do, it was also what I lived.
Hello.
So your first 3 chapters talked about grandmother raising me, grandmother, being that inspiration, grandmother being a lot. And then I work inside the jail, so I hear the women talking about, being left and mom leaving and dad leaving and not being, being in foster care, not being cared for properly. So that was like, wow.
And you know what? I think about what you're saying, and I think about that could have been me, because that is what oftentimes happens, right?
Yes.
And so I'm grateful that it wasn't, but my heart goes out to those who didn't either get what I got or didn't learn from some of the things that came to them as a struggle, and so my heart goes out to them. And I'm grateful for you to be writing and doing what you do to encourage them. And I'm hoping that what I'm doing will do the same thing. Yeah, so I can see how this resonated for you.
And you know what? You said something here similar to what you said. Domestic violence wasn't just an unwelcome visitor. It lived and thrived at our home. And that's basically what you were saying, how you two have shared experiences.
Yes.
And in that regard, shared writing. Books
Good
talking
stuff, Kimberly.
to each other. And books do talk to each other.
Yes.
And Virginia Woolf said that. Books talk to each other.
Good stuff. Anybody else?
Well, one of the things I appreciated about this is sometimes I struggle in my classes to explain to students what creative nonfiction is. And I always tell them, you have to know your purpose, why you want to share your story. And if you know why you want to share your story, you'll know why it matters to you, and then you'll know what you have to share with your audience. And yours has that sense of purpose from the beginning, and it has that great storyteller voice. I'm reading a story. I'm not reading a here's what you should know about my life.
Right.
It's a story, you know, and your motivation in the character of Melanie is it comes through really clearly to me, because you've got that one thing standing in front of the mirror. You as young as you were had a sense of what you wanted to be. And that comes through in here. Well, even amidst all the things in your life that you're dealing with, you've got that thing that maybe you didn't know it then, but as a reader I'm picking up on is pulling you forward. And that's what I appreciated about it. It's definitely creative nonfiction.
I love your insights, Regina.
thank you.
Definitely. It's like people like you and Mamie are the ones you want to make sure that you're in the review of the book. Open up the book, there's their review of it. Because, you kind of go into intricacies of it that I think I went into, but I didn't realize that's what I was doing because my heart was going into it.
Yeah, well, that's the other thing I tell my students. When you write, you're writing for we had a whole conversation about this in my grad class last night. You write for yourself. And you know the story you want to tell, and you know why you want to tell it.
Yes.
And once your story is written, then you look at it and think about, who's my audience? And then you find your purpose for them in that. You always have to write. If you're writing knowing exactly, here's what I have to tell people, it's flat.
It comes off like that,
yes,
doesn't it?
It does. Yes.
The teacher in me wants to know about creative nonfiction. Isn't that relatively new? I was exposed to it at UWF, and then when I thought, well, I guess I can come up with my own definition. It's nonfiction creatively presented, as opposed to something that is strictly nonfiction, lacking creativity per se?
Well, I have always argued that creative nonfiction has been around for a long, long time. It was named,
okay,
mid 20th century.
Okay, named, but it's been around. That makes sense.
I like
okay.
that.
Yeah, and I'd even extend on that a little bit and to say that all writing really is creative. I think even when you're working on nonfiction text, traditional ones, historical pieces, that there's a lot of creativity that goes into figuring out the right way to say what you're saying. So it might be a term that's been coined, but nonetheless, there's still a heavy creative process.
Right. So, Dee Dee, your book is creative nonfiction. I believe the nonfiction part comes in. You want to make it so creative that it reads as a story, almost like a fantasy. So it's creative in that way, but it is nonfiction. It's factual.
Yes,
Right.
it's based on a true story, for
Right.
sure.
And I commend you for sharing yourself. I share the same thing at the workshops that I give. You got to know your who and you got to know why. If you can be firm on that, and you were very focused from the jump in your book, right in the beginning, why you were writing the book and who you were trying to reach just comes out. And they say to write as if you don't want to get published, just write. And you just, your heart just poured out. So write as if you don't want to be published, and then publish it.
Now see,
That's it.
that was it. That's always been it. You know, in the first part of the show, I showed you this 350-page manila envelope with the book in it. But I don't think I had done that. I just let it flow all out. And then in the second rewrite, I guess years later, with what I just did in seminary, then it became a little bit more focused. And there was a lot more love poured into it from the standpoint of giving glory to the Lord. And then the other part of this is not really recognize, I am pouring out my soul. In fact, I almost wanted to call it the essence of my soul, but somebody had that title. Because that's what it was. It was like emptying out and sharing that with whomever decides to read it. And I'm hoping that, and like I say in the preface, if just one person reads this and they find just one chapter and there is something that they take from that and gleaning from it, that they take that away and they grow from it, then I've been blessed all the more. It wasn't about the publishing per se or having the bestseller or becoming rich off a book. It was about being enriched by the people that it touched, you know, and so that's what the payoff.
Yeah, you said something, you know, I'm full of quotes. Alice Walker, the pen writes what the soul can read. And then back to what you were saying, we have this posted in the writing lab to remind students, and this is a good reminder for writers, budding writers, write when you write, revise when you revise, never mix the two. Because I'm sure creative writers, if they stopped every moment to fix a comma and change it to a semicolon, that beautiful and that creative thought is gone. Oh, I was going to say something. What was it?
It's different sides of the brain, the creative and the editing. Different sides of the brain.
Good point.
I'm glad you said that, because the instructor who helped me write this over the summer, Dr. Sandra Glahn, she was like, tell the editor it's not her turn. It's the writer's turn. And that I struggle with, because that was probably why I didn't publish years ago, is because I was always reinventing who the audience was and what the message was, and you know, and then what stories to tell, and then I don't like that, start all over again, you know, and so you never get finished when you're doing that. And you know, I guess in some ways that's considered writer's block of another kind. Maybe.
You get overwhelmed if you think, okay, I got to sit down and write a book. So I always just share, just write, just write. Let the editor do their job. You just write, just write. Don't worry about paragraph placement and sentence structure and grammar. Just write.
I'm curious about the beginning of your book when you first started, and not just the first pages, but when you first started. There's a Ta-Nehisi Coates quote that I like a lot, and he talks about the terror of the blank screen. And I know that from doing a lot of deadline writing when I write for In Weekly. But when you know that a paper is due, you know an article is due, and you don't know how to start. So how did you start?
How did I start?
Did it just come right out, or because you're really giving your heart out in here?
Really. You know what? I just started from the beginning. It was just a matter of just, where did all this begin for me? 4 years old, on a swing. It's like it just began. So yeah, and it is pouring my heart out, and I was very afraid of that, because it's like you become very, very vulnerable, very, very quick. I think another part of it is it's life already lived. It doesn't really define who I am, you know, now. It's just who I am going forward. It's part of who I am going forward.
Oh, how old
that
were you
matters.
when you started writing?
Well, when I started writing
this book.
This book, oh yeah, well, probably in my mid-20s.
Okay.
This book.
Right. Okay.
This was that book. This book that we're going to publish next year is what I started over the summer, under the instruction of the seminary, Dallas Theological Seminary, along with Dr. Sandra Glahn, who helped me. And her thing was, when she met me, I told her this story in the first part of the show. She said, I love when someone comes up to me and they say, I'm a writer and I've been writing and here's where I am, as opposed to someone saying I want to be a writer. Because for her, it's like, if you want to be a writer, go write. But if you are a writer, then how can I help you along the journey? And so, yeah, it is a blank screen at first, but in my heart, in pouring that out, it just started from the beginning. My daughter's read some of this and she'll say, Mama, and this is that editor thing going to work, and I say, shh, don't say anything. She'll be like, why don't you start in the middle? Put the middle first. For me, I'm just a chronological girl. I just do things in order.
And it doesn't have to be that way in the book itself, too.
Exactly.
So you can always edit and change it around.
Exactly.
Right.
There's a song, Chronological Girl.
That's what I am. That's good. This one always has something to say. So, who did we fall in love with in the book from this particular group? What was your person that maybe resonated something in your life, or even a person that you may have been inspired by?
The dad.
Yeah.
I fell in love with the dad only because I could relate. And I like that about your book. I believe everyone, whoever reads your book, you cover so many areas of life. There's no way you can read that book and not find some part that will touch you or someone you know. But the dad, being military, my father was military, so I immediately connected with him and the way he tried to bring his job, his rank, into the home. Comical in a way, but it's like, wait a minute, this is not this is not the military, but that's what they know.
Yes.
That's what
And
they know.
And I loved how he allowed my mother to be the commanding officer, even
Right.
though everybody knew she was not, and then, so it's kind of comical in a lot of ways. And I talk about how my dad did the kung fu thing with us as kids, and whose dad didn't do that back in the 70s? And that was the thing I wanted to tell everybody. This is a time, we're talking about the late 70s, or the early 70s into the 70s and 80s, when we're talking about this time frame and what's going on. So when you talk about kung fu and David Carradine and snatching the pebble from the hand and being ready to go out into the world, Daddy did those things with us, in the kung fu punches in the wind and that kind of thing, and being larger than life. I think a lot of kids see their fathers as being something larger than life, and so when that's ripped away, what does that do? It does the opposite of what you write about, Kimberly. It can have that opposite effect on someone, and in fact it did with some of my siblings. But then for me, by the grace of God, I ended up with my two grandmothers. I call them, one was my great-grandmother and one was my grandmother, Ruby and Moses. And these two women were able to just do something for me, that it's priceless, And so it's just a first three, and so much more to come. I tease all the time, Mamie, you'll love this, because she's the grammar queen. I tell everybody, this is just the first three. It gets gooder.
That's a great use of that word.
It gets gooder. That'll work.
That'll work.
Now, you speak of the grandmothers, and that's who I fell in love with, because, like I told you, my story was like yours. My mom lost custody of me, and I went and stayed with my grandparents. And I was fortunate to have Medea. And I had the real Medea. And I had my grandmother too, and she was my jewel, teaching you how to cook, teaching you, giving you that. And to me, at that age growing up, and even it's not about the same age in your book, where you don't know how to read the Bible and understand it. So she give it to you in bits and pieces, where when you read it, what she's telling you is like, it's entering. So when you read that Bible finally, it makes sense. And not only makes sense, it feeds your spirit. So I fell in love with Grandma, because Grandma was like, yes, that's the Savior. She's helping us. She's doing this.
She's Moses.
Yes.
Female
Go
Moses.
free the people.
Yes. Free you.
I liked the grandmothers as well, because they were grandmother Ruby, or dear mother Ruby, and then great grandmother Moses, together, or my dad's mom, because you didn't make her mad, and if you did, you ran. And the Bible was always there.
Yes.
You didn't put another book on top of the Bible.
Oh, no.
You never throw a Bible away.
Oh, no.
If it's open, you read what it's open to because it's open to that for a reason.
Yes.
And but she'd smack you with it. So when I read Dear Mother Ruby, when we first meet her, I was like, oh, I know her.
I had one of those.
I miss her.
Yeah.
And then Great Grandmother Moses, oh, she's in there too. I thought you drew them really, really well.
Thank you.
I like those uncles because there was something curious about them. There was something predictable about the mother, the dad, the grandmothers, because they have those names that suggest something about their portrayal. But these uncles, I think I was surprised at their actions. But let me throw this in. I think food is a character in your
Why do you say food is a character in the memoir?
Because it does figure, just like religion, it figures quite prominently. You describe some of these meals, and those meals brought you all, gave you some security and brought you all together. So I just thought I'd throw that in.
Mama's cinnamon tinge butter
Yes,
cornbread.
which I had never heard of.
I could
But
tell
it
there was
sounds
something in
good.
that cornbread.
The way you described that food, I could smell it.
Yes.
Yes, the rice.
Yes.
The beans, oh my goodness.
Neck bones.
Neck bones, yes.
See, that's good writing.
that
when
is.
you don't just talk about it, but you allow your readers to experience it.
Yes.
You mentioned the senses. I could taste it.
Yes.
And that's what you want as a writer. You want your readers to experience, to feel what you went through.
I definitely did. You know, in writing memoir, we can talk about some of the difficulties in doing this. But in this particular piece for me, it was very important to appeal to people's their senses. What do you see? What do you feel when I'm talking about the wind? What do you smell when you smell the cooking, in the kitchen? What you know what I mean? So what are you hearing when you hear the lawnmower go vroom, 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 and I talk about that wide mouth lawnmower, and it's like a monster chasing, around there, kicking out rocks and spewing out stuff, and how Daddy would say, you go get on the swings, because I couldn't do anything. I was low enough for the rocks to tear me a new one. So yeah, I tried to paint those pictures to get you to understand and see what was going on in my life, so that you're kind of drawn in. I'm giving you, that's how I did this.
And you're a journalist, so you know to write like that.
Now she had to go put that in there.
But for an aspiring author, they're not really sure on how to write, like you said, 300 and some pages. You see books with 60, 70 pages in it because they may not be knowledgeable of how to expound, how to explain, details. Like, we sat down and had a meal. Well, what was on the table? Who was at the table? How was the table set? What did you think while going to the table? All of these things that they may not think about. So your first book, you did a good job.
Did it.
In other words.
When did you start calling yourself a writer? Same with you two, because I don't think I'll ever get to that point. I'm a teacher who writes. I'm not a writer.
Listen, when I come on a set with y'all, I don't feel like one. I'm like, I have so much to aspire to. Even with Readers and Writers Inc., the book club, you all gave me so much good critiquing. We didn't talk about it a lot on the air, but we can talk about it now a little bit, because I do want you to know some of the struggles that went even behind writing this. And one of them is, we talked about this, I don't want to be fair, we talked about how I've worked in some scriptures in the first 3 chapters. And what I was tasked to do from Dallas Theological Seminary was to find a way, by my instructor I should say, was to find a way to weave in carefully what I learned along the way about my spirituality, because that's what was happening. There was a spiritual awakening happening for me, especially with those 2 wise grandmothers that I had, as you can imagine. But yeah, so there's going to have to be maybe even some rewrite to make sure that there's not an abrupt stop, that I don't throw my readers when they get to some of those places, because I don't want to do that. I really want you to read the story, because the story does that anyway. I don't have to have that abruption in there.
Well, that's why I asked who your market was, because you mentioned that it was a Christian book. So you have to know who your market is in order to speak to that group, because you'll lose your readers if you don't know
My thing is, it is definitely a book for believers, but I'm just praying that for non-believers, people who maybe don't understand things, that they might come away with some sense of understanding. I'm not trying to skew that or push something on them, but I just want to let them know some things that I didn't know, that now I do. And there's been a certain amount of freedom that has come with knowing.
You want them to come on your journey with
Yes,
you.
it is definitely a journey.
Right.
But even if they're non-believers, there's enough in your book that is relatable. The level of relatability, I think, is very high. You have family, you have mother-daughter relationships, you have sibling relationships, you have what a lot of people experience, being reared by someone other than the biological parents. So I think there is quite a bit for the non-believers.
Yeah, and I'm hoping that that's there for them.
I think one of the characters I related to, and goes back to what you're saying, is the father. And in my dramatic literature class, I just finished teaching fences, and it reminded me quite a bit of the father, in the story, where somebody who is trying to become something, or maybe had this moment, where they were. And I was in the military, and I was enlisted as well, so there's always that feeling that you know your place, you know your caste, and because of that, then you always feel you want to be something bigger, and the home is a place where you can do that. And you could see that in fences a lot, where I could make it in the big leagues, I could make it, in this way, but this is a place where I can be that. And that was one of the things that I found really relatable in the text. And looking at this, it made me think about not only my father, who was also in the military, my stepfather also was too, and how they acted, and how they acted in good ways and often not great ways, the examples I learned from them, but then also in myself too, as a father. My kids are out in the green room now. And
Doing homework.
I'm sure that's on camera, right? but thinking about if, am I always the best example, and how much is the good rearing in there, but also the bad stuff too. How much of all of that comes in. Scott. So we're all imperfect in
Absolutely.
that way. And I like seeing that struggle, within him.
Yes, good. I'm glad y'all see this.
And was your message, was part of it, that change comes through spirituality, religion, or change comes through just the journey itself without those components? I'm thinking again of the non-believers. They can take away change, making changes in themselves.
Yes.
Would they necessarily need religion or spirituality to do so?
I think that comes at the end. So I think you're onto something when you say, for a non-believer who would be reading this along the journey, they would still learn and get and see and grow and, in a lot of other ways, as I did, because I don't think until you get to the very end that you see the real divine purpose. For me personally, in that journey of my life, that I really look back and say, wow, all those things were just setups to bring me to where I am now. It hurt. It was painful. But through it all, here I am. And so I think it's interesting enough that I mentioned this on the first part of the show, that when people see people on TV, they think of us as the people who have it all together. We're on the news, we're giving you the news, we're smiling and doing all those things because you don't really want to see the dirt. You don't want to see us not smiling. You don't want to see us not, you know what I mean? You don't really want to see that. You just want to get the news and go on and feel good at the end of the day, or be impacted by the news. And so to take an opportunity out of my life to write this and show that, okay, it wasn't all roses. And it wasn't just about sitting there and sitting pretty. There was a lot of ugly going on behind the scenes.
You're real. We get to see a real person, because you're right about television. Growing up as a child, I just didn't think these were people. They were just ectoplasmic images, I guess.
Pretty word.
Reminds me of being in the grocery store, and I was teaching high school, and one of my students said, "Oh, you buy groceries? Shocked to see me in another venue other than behind the desk. So I think with your being a television personality, it's probably more so than, say, with a teacher.
Right.
Like you,
yeah,
you
for
actually
sure.
live, you actually have a life, you
Yes.
have a family.
Yeah. And then the other part of that is being a walking billboard.
Right.
Because everywhere you go, you're the lady on the news.
Yes.
And so that can cause you to put on a false face.
Yes.
And be that person for the people. Because the first thing that's going to happen is when you're rude to somebody, they're going to be like, I don't like her. I'm not watching that. And the ratings, so you're still a walking billboard for everything that you're doing.
Is it
how you're
Robin
living.
Roberts? Is that the Good Morning? What's
Right.
the show?
GMA. Yes.
Her book, Everybody Has Something. You would not believe the person sitting giving the news is the
Okay.
person in this book.
Yes.
The pain that she went through with her surgeries and just near death and just the not being able to be who she was. But in that book, it's just amazing. And you do the same thing. They say the best sellers are the stories that we don't want to tell.
Well, this one's going to be knocked out the park. 'Cause I'm telling you right now, it was hard to tell. It's hard to tell. It's really an outpouring of a lot of things that I'm not necessarily proud of, but I think it's worth telling someone about. Domestic violence is real. I've sat on this in this very studio and done interviews. And I tried to let the interviewee know that, yes, I too have been there. But this is the book where you get the details. I've been on these different sides. I've been homeless, struggling through college. I've been through a lot of the things that I reported about. I was impacted by a lot of those things. And so people say, well, you have PTSD from a car accident, or you have this. I feel like when I look back at there's PTSD all through all of that. There are a lot of people who end up with PTSD from divorces. I've had 2 of them. You know what I mean? There's a lot that goes to being a single parent for 17 years. So anyway, long story short, it is a journey that I'm hoping people will take along with me and see how I learned when I look back that I was not alone. There was always someone, even when we talk about the taxi cab driver who kind of got caught in the middle of everything between the 2 uncles, the angel who took me and my siblings in and took care of us until someone showed up. My mother finally showed up and got us. That's tough. You don't want people to know that, you had an uncle who abandoned you and a taxi cab driver to take you around to drop you off somewhere where you weren't wanted. That's embarrassing. But when you think in the scheme of things, people are abandoned every day. People go through struggles and strife in their lives every day, and they do go on to do great things. And so I wanted to tell my story, get it out. I liked something somebody said. They said, don't die with a book inside of you.
Okay.
That was powerful to me.
Yes.
I didn't want to die with a book inside of me.
And, back years ago, people are known for leaving legacies, leaving, something to pass on to your kids, pass on to your generation. That's what books do these days. If your grandkids have not got to meet you and you left that legacy here because you didn't die with it on the inside of you, that is like the best thing ever. When I wrote my book, I told my daughter, I said, I don't want you to read it now. I want you to wait until God called me home. And you have kids, read it then. It's going to mean a lot to you. It's going to make a lot of sense. But that's that legacy that we can leave for the next generation and, it can help other people out.
Right,
That's true.
I want to get you in here, Regina, as we're talking about genres. My book is a memoir. Can you help us to understand the difference between a memoir and an autobiography?
An autobiography is your whole life. An autobiography isn't a story. I was born on this date. I did all of these things. And they're usually no fun to read. I don't think anyway. I've read a few. The memoirs are focused on something that you want to share, either a particular expertise from your life or like yours. You've articulated so well exactly, why you want to write this book. So you're not trying to tell your whole life story, just something that matters to you and you're using the techniques of fiction, scene, dialogue, point of view. You even changed the character. You've changed real people's names and you've turned them into characters. You don't see characterization in autobiographies. You see facts. And characters are what make stories come to life for readers. That's what we connect with. And that's why memoir, I think the memoir is more powerful than autobiography because it's more focused.
One thing that helped me, I said this in the first part of the show, is my instructor gave me 3 books to read before I ever got started with my writing this summer. And I was like, I'm a writer, what am I reading? And she was like, you gotta learn. You need to know how to do this. You don't know. And so I think that really helps. So I would tell you, if you're wanting to write your story, read other people's stories.
It's true.
I'm serious. And I was afraid for the longest. Reading other people's stories would make me pull what they were talking about into my own. But my story is my story.
We all do that anyway.
That's
We
true.
all pull from other people's stories.
That's true. We're not plagiarizing. I think we should read everything from the slave narrative to books in the canon, the classics and anything in between. You have to have read a great deal because then you develop the language of writing from the reading. You don't have to read a style book to show you how to write or a grammar book to show you how to put words and sentences together. You just read good writing.
Yes.
And it
That's
helps you
good.
develop your own style
Yes,
when you
it
read the
does.
different styles of writers.
Can I get like a recording at just this moment of the show so I can show it to all my students who claim they don't need to read? Because I don't think some of them believe me.
Well, you can tell easily the writers who do not read. Now, you can tell it as soon as you take a look at those papers.
Oh, yes.
But writers develop over. I know when I read We Snap in Silence, which was written in 2009, I read it now, it's like, oh my goodness, I gotta put this aside.
Can't look
But
at
I
it.
have developed and evolved as a writer. So that first book, unless you have experience writing, it's gonna be a little difficult to write. But again, that's where copy editing comes in to help bring the book to life.
I'm so glad you said that, LaVender. The first book is always the hardest because I think you're still struggling with what it is you're really doing and you're still learning it and you're still copying and putting it together and figuring it out and moving and so it gets a little confusing, but the thing is not to be discouraged.
Right.
Just keep writing.
Keep writing.
You're gonna get there.
But is everybody a writer? Now that's the question.
Now that's on you. Your question, you answer it.
I'm throwing it out there for all of you.
Everybody has a story.
Tell us.
Everybody does have a story. I agree. Now, but is everybody a
No.
writer? We need to be honest about that.
No.
No.
So the lady who called and said, I have wrote a
vote
book,
no.
she's not a writer.
You know what? I do believe you have to stay in your lane. Because I do not sing.
A book coach,
What was
a
that?
writing coach, a book coach, a writing coach
Okay.
to help. Because I come across quite a few people who want to write a book but can't write. So I just find a way, even if I just ask a bunch of questions, sometimes I'll come up with 50, 100 questions to ask them, and they will just answer, and I will help them develop. We come together and develop the story based on those questions. But, if you have a desire to want to write a book, that's a good thing. So if the desire's there, it can be done. It just takes some work and reading.
Oh, definitely. Let's go into a few more genres before we run out of time. So we've talked about memoir, we've talked a little bit about autobiography. What are some of the other, and we've talked about creative fiction, nonfiction. What are there some more genres we need to be talking about so that we can
Kim wanted to
familiarize
raise her hand.
Kim, I'm
she
sorry,
wants to
Kim.
be in school.
I keep doing this, I can keep it out.
Raise her hand over there.
Kim, she's trying to get in. We'll take your comment first. How about that, Kimberly? And then we'll come back to this question.
I was gonna just go back on what she had said. When my first book was a term paper, I was not a reader. My teacher challenged us to read stuff, and she would put it around us coming to class and having to have learned it. Like, why is the highway named behind a president? Well, you had to read to get that answer because Google was not the university at the time. And even then, reading on Google now still makes you read. So I wasn't a born reader and writer. I did a term paper. My teacher loved it and said it should have been a book, and I was like, there's no way I'll ever be an author. And then all of a sudden,
2 books later.
yeah, but I'm right here. The first book was like, girl, what are you doing? But it took me to learn, and I learned at this school in Texas, writing comes by discipline, not by inspiration. And I had to learn,
I like that.
the difference in it.
Yes,
So
that's a
that's
real
why-
big golden
Right.
nugget right
That
there.
is.
Well, that's what I tell all my students in my classes is that if you think that writers are born, that this is a skill that you're born with, that it's this talent that only certain people can get, then it's something you'll never achieve. And it's just like any other skill. You know, if you're a carpenter, probably your first bookshelf will be not so great. You know, the next one's going to be a little bit better. But everything else, if you continue doing it, and ideally going back to writing, that what I do when I look at my articles is I always hope the next one's going to be just a little better than the last one.
Yes.
And if the next one isn't as good, then isn't as good. Yeah, then I try and make it better.
I'm glad, because Scott, what you just said is very encouraging for someone who may be on the fence, wants to write a story, but wants to write their story, but they don't really know if they have what it takes. That's very encouraging. I had a news director many years ago named Bill Tail Zortman when I was a news anchor in WAKA out of Montgomery, Alabama. I remember that he used to tell me when I'd have some of the worst shows where I'd be befuddled all over the words and just was really bad, and I'd come in and I would have this look of defeat. This was my first years my first real anchor job in Montgomery. He said, "You're only as good as your last show," and now I really understand what he means. And when I hear what you say about becoming a better writer as you go, you're only as good as your last book or your last article. You're only as good as that, and
as long
you
as
keep going up.
Yeah, and as long as you're still alive, you can still put another one out afterwards too.
Right.
Keep on going. Now we can go to the other genres. Anybody want to take on that?
Fantasy.
Fantasy.
Now that's a genre that I have a writer who came to me and she's writing fantasy. I don't have a clue. You know, Harry Potter series.
Yes.
And I'm thinking,
I actually, over the summer, back to what I had to read, was Stephen King's writing, his book on writing.
right.
And it was such a big help for me to see. I mean, everybody knows Stephen King and all of the movies that he's done, I think fantasy type movies, but reading how he got there and how he has matured in his writing and everything is encouraging, because you realize these are people who just had a love for doing something and they were able to go on to become who they
didn't
are.
stop.
They kept getting better and better, and I appreciate the gift that he gives us and giving us his take on being a writer.
and you're doing the same thing with your first book. You're doing
Thank
the
you.
same thing.
Well,
And there are a lot
thank you.
of authors whose names I can't recall, but who've had their publications rejected several times. Can you all think of any? I can't think of-
Yes.
J.K. Rowling, Harry Potter.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Really?
Chicken Soup for the Soul.
Okay.
They were rejected by almost
Okay.
150 publishers.
Okay.
Chicken Soup for the Soul.
Look at there,
authors.
and they've
And
got
look where
so
they
many
are.
series of
They're
them now.
all over the place. They were told that nobody wants to read stories.
Isn't that something? But persistence.
Yeah.
Persistence. Persistence.
And go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Go ahead.
And they marketed the book. That's one thing we didn't touch on. 10% is writing the book, where 90% is marketing. And that's where most authors fail. You're doing a wonderful job. You have a platform. But marketing, even before the book is released, they say 6 months to a year to get that book out there. It's like opening up a shoe store. You don't wait until the grand opening and then try to get people to come. You've got to give some.
Your audience.
Yeah.
And in fact, I've learned that the way things have gone now with writing, and you guys can answer this question, excuse me, it seems as though publishers now want to know that you have a platform and a way to sell your book and a way to market it and everything. They want you to come to the table with how you're going to get there.
You cannot
okay.
touch a traditional publisher like Simon & Schuster or HarperCollins unless you have a huge platform, and they're big on social media, huge on social media. They want you to have thousands of followers because they want to make sure they're going to get their money back. And I believe that's why self-publishing and self-publishing companies are so big now, because you don't have to have all of that. You can just put the book out there. But they want to make sure that you have a following.
I remember Terry McMillan did her own marketing. I think she went around from college campus to college campus selling her books, and all of her books ended up being bestsellers.
Yes.
Walt Whitman wrote his own reviews.
Okay. Smart man.
That's an idea.
Big ones.
Smart
Good
man.
stuff.
Wow.
So that's what you do, Kimberly. You're a promoter.
Yes.
Tell us some of the things that you look for and what you do.
So being a promoter, doing events and doing that kind of thing, you really want to, you look at a lot of, like she said, people who have a huge following, who has a big fan base, who gonna be that big draw, who's gonna help you really make that, that big sale. So promoting, even in doing it in a book, you want to build your audience. Starting off, like she said, like now's a good time, and you're blessed to have a great platform early. So when that book hit, when you start doing pre-sales, they're already expecting it. It skyrockets before you even hit the publishing part and print. So that's a great thing. The best thing that's happening to us now is social media.
Mm-hmm.
People who are publishers and do not have social media, you are knocking your book
There you
sales.
go.
So are you after so much self-publishing, or you're looking for a publisher? What is the thing? You self-publish, or you look for the big publishing companies to
I guess
write?
you have to know, going back again, your why. Are you writing because you want to inspire one person, or are you writing for a bestseller? Self-publishing is very difficult. I mean, traditional publishing, the big-time publishers, you have to have a literary agent. You can't just go knock on the door to a big-time publisher unless you have a literary agent. They do the knocking on the doors for you, unless the publisher is to have open submissions where they're taking manuscripts, which is rare. But you have to have a doggone good book.
What do you look for when you're publishing people's works? I mean,
Well,
is there
I
a
basically
particular
help
criteria?
first-time authors,
Okay.
those writers who I need some help, I don't know what to do. So my publishing company just gives information. I give workshops to help give the knowledge of what the publishing world is about. A lot of writers don't even know that there's more than one type of publishing. Traditional publishers, independent publishers. I give the information. Then you go out and do what you need to do. But sometimes you don't even know what questions to ask. So you got to have the knowledge. So the workshops just give a little information on what the publishing world is.
And how do you get the book on the bestsellers list? I asked that question because someone asked me to send an email or go to a link, and she said, my book will end up on the bestsellers list if I can get enough people to go to this link. Is it that simple?
There are so many different types of bestseller. There are different bestsellers.
All right.
Now Amazon,
Yes.
that's self-publishing. There are just certain categories that you can choose for your genre of book, and it just depends on the categories. It's a word game.
Well, shoot for the bestseller.
Even speaking on the difference in traditional publishing and self-publishing, I can say for myself, I did self-publishing for two reasons. When I first contacted, and I won't call the company's name, they first said, send me a copy of your transcript. Send me everything that you read. Let us take a look at it. If we like it, we'll do it. And I wanted more information. So I said, if you take what's next? And they went down, well, we'll do this for you. We'll do that for you. We'll make sure that you have this many copies. And we get you in bookstores. We get you on the bestseller list. But as far as money-wise, they're going to basically take on the risk technically, but you're going to not profit from your work a lot. So to me, I thought that was pimping and prostitution because I'm doing all the work while you're getting paid for it. And I was like, no.
Now, Kimberly, we are on PBS.
Might have to edit that one.
Self-publishing, like she said, it's a lot harder work because you are going to have to really sell yourself. Build your audience up, get your name out there, do workshops, do book signings, go here, go there, do speaking engagement. Build yourself where people will know, number one, who you are, and what is this that you're selling.
Very good.
I have a friend who self-publishes, and he's been doing this for a number of years. And he started off, well, I guess they're still kind of in the underground press a little bit, called zines. But he's been doing this since 1981, and he's been continuously doing this. And now he's up to, his usual sales are around 10,000 is how many he is able to sell. And I promise you that he makes more money because he self-publishes than everybody I know at the university who publishes all these other books, and they have University of something, or this other publisher, that he probably makes more money. He controls everything with it, so everything from the art on the front, on the cover, to on the back, to everything in between. And it's just really through that, and then a lot of persistence.
Now he's living my dream in the second part of my life. That's what I want to do.
Well, he's been doing it since the 80s. He's been doing it since the 80s.
He's busy.
He is busy. Yeah, he's busy. But it's dedication, though.
Gotcha. Regina, I want to get you back into the conversation here. How about ghostwriting? Maybe somebody's not the best writer in the world, but they have a story to tell. Is that an option? Or what is that about?
Yeah, there are ghostwriters out there. There were 2 students a few years ago. I won't put their names out there, but they did ghostwriting, and that's how they paid their bills. And I don't know how to get into being a ghostwriter.
Okay.
But
can you explicate what that means?
it means that your name isn't going to go on the book anywhere. For example, they were given the synopsis, the outline, here's the characters, here's what we want the story to be, and then they wrote it. But someone else's name went onto the book. So you're just making somebody's idea come to life.
Okay.
And not putting your name on it and taking any credit for it, or putting it out there, hey, I wrote this book for someone.
But you get paid.
Yeah, yeah. It's very different from, sometimes you'll see like celebrity biographies, it'll be their name with so-and-so.
Yes.
That's not ghostwriting. That's,
Okay.
They're sort of co-writing with them.
Okay.
Yeah, ghostwriting, you get paid, but you take no
But a
credit.
ghostwriter is really a ghost. That person
Yes.
doesn't
Yes.
exist.
Yes,
The author, the person, gets credit.
yes.
Right.
Full credit.
Yes.
Wow.
Maybe you could do that. I've done a few ghostwriting.
I've been
jobs.
asked, but I don't have the
I
time.
talked to Mamie. I said, Mamie, will you please edit my book? So let me get to editing for a second here. And I said, I'm writing and I want you to edit because I know how good she is, right? And
Scary
she was,
good.
yes, very good. And she was like, no, I can't do that. And then I realized what she really meant. I won't say everything that she said, but I understood where she was coming from because I'm there too. I've had several people go, will you help me write my book? Will you write my book? The thing is, I guess when you're an artist yourself, it's like you pour yourself into what you do. And I think it's a special gift, not to say you don't have it, but I think it's a special gift when you can do that for somebody else. When you can pour yourself into creating and helping them do what they're doing. That's a gift in and of itself.
You have to know their voice. You have to
Yes.
spend time with them
That's
to
true.
know their voice so the book reads
Yes.
as if they wrote it. But celebrities, you mentioned celebrities, when you see their faces, 9 times out of 10, they had a ghostwriter. They don't have time to sit and write a book.
Just like the
Michael
presidents
Jackson
have-
did not have time to sit and write a book. He had a ghostwriter.
Well, they have the
have
money where they
speechwriters.
They
can
have
get
the
a
money. Exactly.
That's it.
They could just tell the story.
Yeah, yeah.
And a lot of people have speech writers, book writers, or
Right.
ghost writers for their
Right.
books. So
Before we wrap up the Aware Show, helping our viewers to write their own stories, I want you all to give us what you have to say to them about doing that, whether that's an inspirational thing or whether it's a tip, a point that they need to know. Because at the end of the day, in this second part of the program, we want them to have what they need to either get over the hump of writer's block or get some information from the Aware Show that will help them write their story. So we can start with you, LaVender.
I would just say don't die with the book in you. I don't care if you have experience writing or everybody has a story. My passion is just to help get those words in print, to tell your story. And just like you, Dee Dee, you want to help someone, everyone. I just feel like there are so many stories 6 feet under, so many memories, so much history, even in the nursing homes. It's just so much history there. Don't die with the book in you. Get the book out. There are book coaches out there. Get rid of all excuses. Don't die with the book in you.
Good stuff. Scott?
Well, I would say to make sure that you understand what you want to say, and if you understand what you want to say, and also be aware of the number of genres that are out there. One of the ones I wanted to mention when we were going around was that you could use poetry as a genre to write about yourself. There's a lot of great autobiographies that have been written in verse. Biographies have been written in verse, where they're told as epic poems. Lots and lots of works like that. And that, I would say figure out what you want to do, but otherwise just write. Just write.
Just right.
Mamie?
And my advice is the same advice that I give to people who ask for a recipe. Read. Read. If you're going to write, you need to read. So that you'll know what an epistolary, for instance, looks like. That may be something you want to venture into. Ta-Nehisi Coates wrote Between the World and Me, and it's a letter from his father, I think, to him, or him to his father.
Him to his son.
The Color Purple is written as an epistolary.
Loved it.
Read different genres, read different authors, read everything. Read a comic book. I grew up on a steady diet of comic books, but I'm seeing words. I'm
So did
seeing
Ta-Nehisi.
words.
Yes, I like
Did
that.
he?
Yeah.
Good to know. Let me get started. But just read something, because there technically is no recipe.
Okay. Regina, less than a minute.
Remember what why you want to do it. Find the joy in it and follow that, and don't worry about what other people are going to think.
Y'all are giving some good stuff. Okay, last is on you. Knock it out in the park,
Comes
Kimberly.
By discipline and not by inspiration. You gotta discipline yourself. If that book is on the inside, set time aside to write. Focus on it. Turn the TV off. Turn everything off. Give yourself 10 minutes a day, 15 minutes a day. Push that baby out.
Okay.
And I love that, because writing comes by discipline. That's what you're saying? For me, it was setting a deadline. That's all I needed
That's the
as a
journalist.
journalist. That's a journalist. The deadline was set, and I wanted to meet that. But I love everything that you all are saying, right down to don't let anybody take it out of you. If you've got it in there, let it out. Don't let anybody take that away from you. And I love you saying read, and write, and don't let that book die in you. That's good stuff. And you just heard it right here on The Aware Show. That's all the time we have for now. I want to thank all of my guests here. As you can see, they had some insightful information to help you. And I want to thank you for being there and joining in on my unfolding of the first 3 chapters of my new book coming out. Hopefully, you have learned a little bit of how to write your story and get it published. All you have to do is do it. We challenge you to put pen to paper, and we'll keep you posted when my book is published. It's now in editing and book cover design, and hopefully it'll be released by mid-2020 at the latest. Got the deadline on there. I get set to enter new chapters into my life, and I get to do it knowing I've shared a few with you. Until the next time, I'm Dee Dee Sharp saying, stay informed and stay aware.